everyone, and thank you for joining this vAuto podcast episode. I'm Lance Helgeson, and I'll be your host for today's discussion. For today's discussion, we're going to take a closer look at how customer expectations for the way dealers market and merchandise their vehicles online is changing, and we'll discuss how dealers can meet these changing expectations. Our guest today is Nathan Fox, Senior Director of Business Development for vAuto. Nathan, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Lance. I appreciate you having me on today.
Absolutely. Thank you for taking time to join us. Now, Nathan, perhaps a good place to start before we get into the meat of our conversation is to give listeners a sense of who you are and the work that you do for Cox Automotive and vAuto.
Sure, Lance. So my current role at Cox is I lead our inventory, merchandising, and marketing businesses, which includes all of our software that helps dealers merchandise their inventory. And so in that role, I spent a lot of time talking to shoppers and understanding their behaviors so that I can help to turn those into tools that enable dealers to more effectively merchandise and sell their inventory online. Just as a side note, prior to joining Cox Automotive, I spent a little over 10 years in the consumer goods industry. It was a really fascinating time to be in that industry because it's when e-commerce really rose to be a key channel for CPG products. Mm-hmm. And so I found that there's actually a lot of parallels between what I learned in that time to what's going on today in the automotive industry. Sometimes slightly different applications, but a lot of parallel thinking there.
So was that the connective tissue that made you make the flip from consumer goods to the car business?
Yeah, I was really intrigued to move into a new business and a new industry where there was a lot of exciting things happening. And so I found it to be a lot of fun to be able to apply that same set of insights, that same set of learning, but to a totally different model and one where it's really fun, where someone's buying a $20,000 product, not a $5 product.
Yeah, for sure. Now, you mentioned there, Nathan, that you've been studying vehicle buyer behavior. So I guess, could you give us a flavor for what some of the high points of the specific merchandising type studies that you've done and what their meaning may be for dealers?
Lance, I think the place I would start today is, how are shoppers shopping, which more so than ever is not on the lot, right? It used to be that they browsed online and they shopped on the lot, but what we're seeing in all of the studies we're doing is, 50% of shoppers now only visit one dealership, which I think is absolutely fascinating, right? It's been growing over time, but in our last study, that's what we found. And that's really a strong signal that consumers are actually making their decision before they go visit the dealership, right? So they're learning about the car, learning about the vehicle, choosing which one they think is right for them, and then going to the dealership. And so that's a monumental change from where it's been historically, where consumers often would go to 3, 4, 5 even lots and look at different cars and sort of shop on lot versus shopping online.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And what would you say in terms of that shift? What's the implication for merchandising? I mean, it seems to me that we now have to facilitate kind of a different buying expectation versus shopping.
Lance, I really think about it as, making sure you have the right content and the right information to allow the shopper to make that decision. As I said, I kind of like to look at past experiences, but maybe even I look at an experience, recent one, of a product I purchased recently online, right? So not a new product or a product I'd never used, but a new product, right? So I was buying a food product online and I couldn't find the ingredient panel. And so I left that website and went to another website and purchased it there. And, I think if you contrast that with if I'd been in a store where the ingredient panel is always available, you just turn the package around, you have to be much more intentional about what information you provide when someone's making a decision in a digital environment than when you have them in a physical environment where there's more readily available access to the product. And so I think for dealers, it's a really good lesson to think about being intentional about the right content that a shopper needs to make a more digital decision.
And as it relates to vehicles, Nathan, what is that content and perhaps how is it that dealers might capture that content and present it, in the vehicle descriptions and listings and such?
I think one of the things we've found is that 360-degree spins is a type of content that's really valuable in this sense. I think the reason being is, a car is probably the second largest purchase that a consumer is ever going to make. And so for them to make that purchase or to even make a decision that they think they want to purchase this product in an online environment, they have to trust the dealer and they have to have confidence in that. And what we found is that 360-degree spin creates a transparency for the consumer that they become more confident in that vehicle. In fact, 8 out of 10 shoppers tell us that they are more likely to consider a vehicle if it has a 360-degree spin, which, fascinating, right? If you go back to the fact that half of shoppers are really kind of making up their mind before they hit a lot, becomes much more important to create that type of content that allows them to put it in their consideration set and ultimately make a decision on what they're going to go explore online.
So my background is in writing, and reading words. So for me, sometimes the written description may sort of function as like the ingredient panel you mentioned. Are you maybe somewhat saying that customers are really looking for more of a visual representation of that more so than the written these days?
I think that customers are looking for transparency, and I think that comes in multiple forms. And so, I think the visualization creates transparency for the shopper because it allows them to explore every angle of the vehicle. I think builds trust with the dealer that the dealer isn't hiding anything or they can see all the flaws on the car. At the same time, Lance, within the 360 technology, there are hotspot tags. Which is a great way for maybe someone like yourself where you can provide more of a written description of something. And so not only does it provide the visual transparency, but it provides a way to deliver more information to that consumer that's digestible and allows them to engage with it and find what's important for them. And so I think it's the combination of both of those. It's really making it a powerful tool for dealers in today's environment.
I probably should have asked this question before I asked the last one, Nathan, but there may be some folks that don't know exactly what a 360-degree spin is. And you alluded to it there, but could you just give us the 30-second rundown of what that technology is?
Sure, Lance. It's scary, right? We start to use acronyms so freely that we forget that they don't always have meaning for everyone else. So a 360-degree spin is a technology to capture a complete walk around of a car. And then that's displayed to the consumer that the consumer can actually spin that car with their mouse, zoom in and out of that vehicle, both the interior and the exterior, so that they can look at each angle of the vehicle. And so, as we said, it's really a great way for the consumer to interface with that vehicle in sort of a digital lot instead of a physical lot, right? In some ways, it almost replaces walking around a vehicle and being able to inspect every angle of the vehicle.
And is that something that a person holds in their hand, or is it sort of a robotic thing that circles the car and does its deal internally, or how does that work?
Lance, you're talking about for the dealer when they capture the image, or for the consumer?
Yeah.
So with the way the dealer would capture it, they would use a smartphone. For our product, SnapLot 360. It works on both Android and iOS devices, and they simply use that application to walk around the vehicle with it. It has a lot of built-in technology to ensure that it's a smooth capture of it. It tells the user when they've done the full 360, and then it automatically generates the medium that is then displayed. Whether it be on a consumer's desktop, their iPhone, their iPad, that they can then move around themselves at their own pace.
Okay, and one more kind of in the weeds question. You mentioned a minute ago about hotspots. So what are those?
So hotspots are flags on that 360-degree image that provide more detail. And so those hotspots can be are automatically applied in many instances where if you've taken an incremental photo, so for example, if you've taken a photo close up of the wheel, it would automatically provide a hotspot of that wheel and show that image. And if the information is available, if it's a custom or if it's a upgraded wheel, it might provide that it's an 18-inch alloy wheel. So as I mentioned, kind of a great way to provide both visual and textual information so that a consumer then can engage into the parts of the car that are important to them.
And you touched on this a minute ago that from a functionality standpoint, this is something that is smartphone driven, but if I'm a dealer, how do I get it? How do I get this technology? and how is it used on a day-to-day basis?
So the Snapbot 360 technology is available in conjunction with both our Viato and HomeNet inventory management and merchandising platforms. You simply subscribe to the product, through Cox Automotive, and then you can download the application. But it's very integrated with the desktop inventory management solution. And so if a dealer is using the product, and let's say they're a Viato subscriber, it would automatically pull inventory from their Viato account into the application. So when they go to capture it, they can simply select the vehicle that they want to capture a spin for. From there, the spin is automatically viewable and manageable within the Viato desktop application. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about how do we make this as efficient as possible for the dealer. We know that dealers have an infinite list of things that they have to do on a day-to-day basis. And so that integration for us was a really important part to making it as simple and seamless as possible for a dealer to utilize.
So how would you describe the adoption of this technology? I mean, are there some leaders out there that we might all recognize that have just kind of made this part of their bread and butter approach to merchandising?
Certainly are, Lance. I mean, I think this is a really fun time to be associated with this product, right? Because it's seen kind of huge sort of momentum and growth at this point. So from the standpoint of kind of leaders, clearly the online only retailers such as Carvana and Vroom, I think they've been the ones that have really been at the forefront of this, and I think everybody sees what they've done in the use of this sort of technology. But we found, most of the progressive dealers in our Viato franchise are all starting to use this product. We're seeing sort of rapid growth since we launched Snapbot 360 and Viato earlier this year. So I think we're really starting to hit a tipping point for this product in terms of its adoption, utilization, et cetera, which I think is really connected to the way consumers are demanding new content in order to make decisions. In some regards, Lance, I think consumers are starting to tell their dealers this is a necessity. It's no longer a nice to have, and so we're seeing a lot of adoption.
Now, I can think back to maybe 10 or 12 years ago when dealers were really starting to embrace the internet and what online marketing and merchandising meant. Some spent considerable sums of money with photo booths, to make sure that they had the right sort of still images. Are we at a point where we can say that this 360 spin technology is perhaps supplanting photos, or is it really more of you gotta have both?
So I think at this point, Lance, they're complements to one another.
Okay.
And I think they complement each other in two ways. One is back to the comment I had earlier about hotspots, right? Photos provide a great way to provide incremental information about the vehicle. Think, for example, about a picture of an engine, right? You may not see that on the spin itself, but you can still use a still photo of that engine attached to a hotspot in order to showcase more information about the vehicle. And then I think secondly, when you think about the entire ecosystem of how vehicles are advertised and merchandised, there are some places where a 360-degree spin just isn't necessarily going to be the best medium. Think about an SRP page where you need that one great hero image where a consumer can look at it and go, yes, that's the color, that's the car that I'm looking for. And I think photos play a really important role there. It's kind of all why, within the Snapbot 360 product, we've built in automatic photo extraction. And so it automatically generates all of the exterior images of the vehicle so that it makes it, again, more efficient for the dealer. That as they capture the 360, they also get the exterior photos, because we know that both of those things are needed in order to drive a complete merchandising program for a dealer today.
So that makes me think of a question and a pain point for dealers, and that is, I've had dozens of conversations over the years with dealers about the time it takes to make sure that their cars, once they get them in and they get them reconditioned and detailed and they want to get the photos, that they get frustrated that their photographer, the person that they might have hired to come in and do things, does it every Thursday, but the car was ready on Monday. So to what degree are you seeing dealers say, oh, I like this because it would help me speed up my frontline ready time?
I think we see dealers implementing this in their process in multiple ways. So I think because it is, phone based and doesn't require special uh, tools, some dealers, have multiple people on their lot who take the images or capture the images. We also see plenty of dealers who continue to use their lot service provider to capture those and feel like they have the most efficient process, and they'd rather have their own people doing other things on the lot. And so, I think for each dealer, it is a slightly different process than what they've probably been accustomed to. Probably takes a little bit of change management on their end. But I think some of the things we talked about earlier around the photo extraction and the integration with their inventory management systems, I think are making it much simpler and smoother for them to implement it.
Okay. Now, you mentioned, just to jump back to sort of broader research on consumer behaviors and things, what can you tell us about perhaps reasons consumers may buy or not fully purchase a vehicle online?
Well, as we were talking about, Lance, I think consumers are stepping farther and farther into the purchase funnel and closer transactions, right? 50% are, visiting one dealer, which says the majority are making decisions online on which vehicle. We found in some of our research over the last number of years that consumers' desire to negotiate a price is much higher as far as negotiating online than it used to be. 3 years ago, a quarter of consumers said they wanted to negotiate the price online. Now it's up to almost 40%. And so again, another step towards that sort of purchase. I think the things that consumers continue to tell us are there barriers to making that final kind of e-commerce transaction are the things you'd really expect, right? Is either I want to test drive the car or I want to see it in person. Again, second biggest purchase a consumer is probably going to make, so you can understand why there's a little hesitancy. Conversely to that, though, when we ask consumers, well, if we give you a 360-degree spin, would you be willing to forego a test drive? And 50% of consumers say they would, and that they'd be willing to make a purchase without a test drive. And so, back to that earlier comment of, getting the right content when someone wants to make a decision in the digital environment. And I think that's where we kind of are at this really interesting inflection point where consumers are willing to make that step. But sometimes the content isn't quite there for them to make the next step in their transaction.
So a personal kind of off script question here, Nathan. So you're immersed in this technology. So for you, when it comes to buying a car, are you one of those 50% that need the test drive, or are you comfortable if all of this stuff is presented online to just pull the trigger and buy the car?
The last car I bought was a few years back. So, at that point, I did do the test drive. I think at this point, I can't say for certain, Lance, but I certainly know that I'd be a whole lot closer to, looking at something online and really knowing what I wanted to buy before I walked onto the dealership's lot. I certainly would be one that would be willing to negotiate the price. I'd certainly be one that would be looking at a car going, I'm going to look outside of my local market, and I'm not going to just confine myself to, a 25-mile radius. And if I find the right car, I'll talk to the dealer on negotiate the price online and then go drive 150 miles if that means I can find the right car at the right price. And so, am I fully transacting online? I don't know yet, but I know my comfort with the technology and changing the way I buy is definitely in a different place today than it was 2 years ago when I bought my last car.
Gotcha. Then a last question, Nathan. What do you think the future holds for online merchandising of vehicles?
Lance, I think about where we are today. You made the comment earlier, hey, 10 years ago when, listings moved from classifieds to, online, right? That was a huge pivot point. And I think we're kind of at a similar pivot point, right? So back then it was, how do I get to 10 photos or 20 photos, right? And provide enough information that the consumer can browse effectively. And that kind of became the requirement. I think, as we think about where we are today, it is, the next step is the necessity of having information or having content like a 360-degree spin. But I think it's still kind of in its infancy. I get really excited when I think about the ability for that to not just be the digital content we're talking about, but the ability for that to deliver more and more information to the consumer in an organized way that the consumer can consume based on what's important to them. And so, I think the next 12 to 24 months, we're going to see, sort of rapid change in the way and the number of dealers that are using this type of merchandising technique.
On that particular point, in that window of 12 to 24 months, from a dealer perspective, I mean, there are some who are going to be out grabbing it, and others who will wait, to see what adoption looks like, what implementation means. And I guess since we are in the early stages with this 360-degree technology, how does the adoption curve of that maybe compare to some other, merchandising technology adoption rates that might have happened over the last, say, 5 or 10 years?
I think like any, almost all technology, right? We're seeing, a steeper climb in adoption rates of just about all new technology. You can go way back to, computers versus iPhones, et cetera, right? And you see the same sort of increasing curves. And I think the same is here, right? I think dealers, consumers, all of us are more comfortable with leaning in with technology. And so I think we've seen that already, right? We launched SnapLot 360 in Viato in April. And the demand we've seen the first 3 to 4 months has been incredible. So I think it's a good indication that it's a pretty steep curve of adoption that we're going to have.
Well, very good. Nathan, thank you very much for joining us for today's podcast. I've learned a couple things, and I will be out looking for 360 spins when I hit the ground for some vehicle shopping here.
Great. Well, thanks for having me, Lance, and appreciate the time today.
Absolutely. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining today's podcast. Until next time, stay well.